Thank you. Thank you very much. I've watched that a few times. I'll tell you what, to have to come to Blair and sit next to Rolly Massimino and listen to what's Fazio, is that right? Italians, you know. I'm actually kind of glad they're here. I'm getting paid to speak here, but now that the keynote address is over, I can pretty much just say hello and go home. Secondly, I thought that this was an occasion, you know, all these guys, Doug West and Marty, great guys. You hear these guys talking about them, it's like it's a roast, you know. Be nice, you know. I'll tell you, Dick Vitale, how can you follow him here? I mean, you know, Dick, it's interesting with Dick, though. You know, he coaches about... See, whenever you say something about Dick, he's got a response. Dick coaches about 60 games a year and hasn't lost a game in about 20 years. He just takes whichever team's up at the end. That's his team. I think he doesn't realize that we all watch television because when he's at Villanova, it's like Rolly Massimino, the greatest coach in the Big East, and the next day he's down at Georgetown, and now it's John Thompson. I don't think he understands we're watching these games, but Dick can talk. Bob Knight was here. I noticed in the program he didn't wear a tuxedo. I'm sure he's the only guy that's ever been here that didn't wear a tuxedo. Of course, Rick Majerus was here. What size? Where did they get that? I don't know where they got that tuxedo from. But it's a privilege for me to be here because I think in all my athletic life, I've liked to be around, surround myself with, and be a part of special events. And just coming in here today and meeting the people that run this event, although it's hard to believe you can have an event of this magnitude run by a sports writer and a lawyer, but you know, they actually had a referee here once present somebody. You ever seen a referee be at any dinner that he had to, you know, that was he invited to a dinner or given an award? I looked carefully through the book. I didn't see any referees mentioned in there getting any awards in this county or any other county in this country, and for good reason. And if a sports writer and referee had to pay, you know they wouldn't be here. I'm going to clear up a couple things tonight before I go. I know I'm in Penn State country. I recognize that. I appreciate that. It was great that Rolly had to play golf today with 2 Syracuse fans. I think that was a great thing for them to arrange that, and I'm sure they're the only 2 Syracuse fans in the area. But I'm going to clear something up about Penn State and the Big East. As much as I respect and admire Joe Paterno, and I will say ahead of time here that I think I'm a great sports fan. I love sports. I love college football. And in my book, he's one of the 2 all-time greatest college football coaches, without any doubt in my mind. And I put Bear Bryant just a little bit ahead of him because I went to Alabama. I was there. And I do believe there's something about Bear Bryant because today he's still the only football coach they've ever had at Alabama. And there's been guys there that won national championships, and there'll be guys there again that win them. But there will, right or wrong, Daniel, there will never be another Bear Bryant. And so I put Joe just behind him. But in saying that, the reason Penn State and Syracuse and there never was a Big East was because in the very beginning, when the Big East was formed by Dave Gavitt, a little guy at a little Catholic school in Providence, Rhode Island, had this idea for the Big East. And when it started, no one thought it was going to be anything but some little conference. And Penn State didn't want to be a part of it at that time. And probably rightfully so. Who knew that Patrick Ewing would come into the Big East in the first year? Who knew that Pearl Washington would come to Syracuse? Who knew that Ed Pinckney and so many great players would go to Villanova, which they had to go there to make Rolly a winner. or that Walter Berry and Chris Mullen would go to St. John's. And the Big East would go in one short year from a conference nobody ever heard of to one of the great conferences in the country like that. No one knew that, and Penn State didn't know it, and they were a football team in school. Well, as a matter of fact, they still are. Well, maybe. But at that time, nobody knew. And I was just happy. I was a young coach. I remember going to the league meetings and listening to Coach Massimino and Coach Carnesecca and Coach Thompson. And as has been said up here, I was just happy to be there at that time. And you knew every game you went out in the Big East. People ask me about the Big East now. We're going in, and Cincinnati's going to come in, and Louisville's going to come in. Yeah, those guys, when you think about it, and they're great coaches. Bob Huggins is a great coach. Rick Pitino is a great coach. But I already coached against John Thompson and Rolly Massimino and Lou Carnesecca. And believe me, it does not get any better than that. Because if you don't know what you're doing and you're not awake every minute of every game, you're going to get your butt kicked every night you go out there. And I was just fortunate to learn in that situation and to be around coaches like this guy sitting over here. And I've watched Coach Nealon's team play and the great rivalries that West Virginia's always had with Syracuse. And it's been great to be part of that league. And there was a time when Penn State and almost got into the league, it just was something that never was able to work out. And I think at the time I kind of was glad about it a little bit because I liked our basketball league and our fans were used to playing against Georgetown and St. John's and Villanova, and they wouldn't have been happy playing against Penn State and West Virginia and Pittsburgh at that time. And when I look back at it today and I think of where we are today in the world, it's too bad that we didn't get together and have that conference of all the football schools, because I think we'd be further ahead down the road and we wouldn't have gone through all that we've gone through in the last year with losing such great teams, obviously, as Miami in football and Virginia Tech and that other school in Boston, that little Catholic school that's leftist. I don't have any animosity toward them, of course, but it's interesting that we lost two of our worst basketball programs, and we got Louisville, Cincinnati, and Marquette, and DePaul. So I think in basketball, I'm kind of worried about our future in terms of toughness, but I think football obviously suffers a little bit. But to be involved in the Big East Conference with the people that I was lucky to be involved with was a great thrill. And when I look at last year, I always tell a story about, first of all, I'd like to say I've watched Mo Stokes play when I was 14 years old when he played for the Rochester Royals. And I didn't know that much about basketball at the time, but I knew I was watching one of the great players that ever played the game of basketball. And the fact that he went here to St. Francis is a great story. And I think for a lot of people that probably don't know the story of Jack Twyman, and who I met, I actually tried to recruit his son, another guy I lost in recruiting. But what Jack Twyman did for Maurice Stokes, I think, is really one of the great stories of all sports in terms of what he did and to help Maurice. But I watched him play, and it was a privilege to be able to watch him. But I had an opportunity last year, and in coaching, you think you get to a certain point where you know a little bit about what you're doing, but the one thing I've learned in coaching is that you learn something every year from every team you coach. Sometimes it's not always something that you really want to learn, but you do learn from it. But I had two guys last year. I had a kid, Carmelo Anthony, who we thought would be with us for a couple years, but his talent was at such a level and his work ethic was at such a level that you knew watching him day in, day out that as a coach, I kind of couldn't wait to get to practice because I knew this was something special. And although I didn't know we were going to win a national championship, just watching this guy develop, this young man develop, and what he brought to the team as a freshman with the big smile and the attitude of, let's just go play basketball, not worry about. He never worried about the NBA. Most players, whether they're freshmen or sophomores, when they're talented, they're worried about one thing. How much money am I going to make? When am I going to make it? How soon can I get to the NBA? And Carmelo Anthony never had a thought like that the entire season, his freshman year with us. And as we went along, it became apparent that he was not going to be with us for very long. Now, at the end, when it was all said and done, and we'd won the national championship, obviously he had the choice of coming back for another year listening to me or going to Denver and making $11 million. Now, we didn't have a long discussion about that. But to watch him come out each day for practice, and I think many of you have been in coaching, many of you have played, you know the story, but when your great player comes out first, when he's there at 3 o'clock for a 4 o'clock practice, when he's working for the whole hour, he's not out there talking to people, he's not out there throwing hook shots up, he's not out there, you know, seeing who's going to come to interview us that day. But when he's out there working for 45 minutes to an hour before practice starts, and when practice starts, he goes harder than anybody else. And when practice is over, he's still there working on his jump shot or his baseline drive. You know you have a guy that's going to take you someplace. And that's what we had with Carmelo Anthony, but he was one guy. We had another guy on that team last year named Queth Duaney, who was kind of the guy I picked on for 5 years. Queth, you know, he liked being yelled at so much he stayed an extra year. But he was the only senior in our team, and any coach will tell you that it's very difficult for a young team with no seniors to have a successful season at all, let alone win a national championship. But the one senior we had who was a good basketball player for us was the one guy when things got tough during the year, when we lost 2 out of 3 games, when it looked like we were a very human team. We lost to the last place team in our league. He was the one guy that got people together and said what had to be said as a player. And as we went on through the year, the thing that was most remarkable about our team in the end was that our 2 best players were freshmen. And no team has ever won an NCAA championship with their best players being freshmen. It's never happened. Chris Webber came close, and he was a great player with Jalen Rose and that group. But they never even won a league championship, let alone an NCAA championship. But we had 2 special freshmen, and our third best player was a sophomore, a skinny sophomore from Philadelphia, who was one of those recruiting stories where you kind of see him and you like him, but you try to hold him off because you think you're going to get somebody better. And luckily for me, his mother knew he wanted to go to Syracuse, and his mother made him turn down 2 scholarship offers to good schools until we finally got smart enough to say, we better take this Hakeem Warwick guy. And that's just one of those recruiting stories. I'll tell this quick one. We recruited a player named Billy Owens, and his schools were Villanova, why I don't know, North Carolina, and Syracuse. And I really thought we had a chance to get Billy because his brother was at Syracuse as a football player, and that's always a good thing when one brother is at your school. But his father really liked North Carolina. His high school coach, son, Jeff Lebo, played at North Carolina and was on Billy in the state championship team in Pennsylvania. And I think, incidentally, Billy's probably the only guy that ever started on 4 state championship winning teams. And I remember one day, Rolly, remember this, we went outdoors. We were outdoors in the summertime and watching Billy Owens play as a junior against the best graduates from all those colleges in the area. And it was windy and, you know, cold, and Rolly and I were sitting there, and Billy goes for 63 against this team of college guys, right? And makes a left-handed dunk, a right-hand dunk, a two-hand dunk, an over-the-shoulder dunk, a jump shot, a push shot, you know, every shot you can make, and had like 10 assists. So we knew he was kind of a special player. But I learned something in recruiting, and it was kind of borne out a little bit here tonight with a couple of the honorees. I flew down to Harrisburg in this little plane, and took 2 hours to fly down. It takes 2.5 hours to drive to Harrisburg from Syracuse. But so we get into, true story, I'm shaking and just sweating and the whole thing. And headwinds. So we get there, and Mr. Owens picks me up to drive me over the house, which is not a rules violation, because he picked me up.
What was that again, please?
So in the car that Rolly bought him, I think it was. No. Not true. So anyway, we get to the house, and there's Billy, who's I've talked to before, and he's heard what I'm going to say, and his father. His mother's not there. This is not good. This is not a good thing. Because you heard up here tonight, if you want to recruit an athlete, you want to recruit a son, the father's okay, but you better get the mother if you want any chance. So I'm sitting here, I've flown down this plane, trying to get Billy. Obviously he's the best player, I think, in the country at that time. Him and Alonzo Mourning were 1 and 2. So I'm there about an hour and a half, and Billy's kind of nodding off a little bit, and his father's asking 56 questions, as fathers sometimes do. No mother, no Mrs. Owens. I'm going, this is great. I'm down here, we've got his brother, we're not going to get this kid. So after 2 hours, finally I get up, I'm ready to leave, going out the door, and Mr. Owens said, wait, Coach, my wife wants to say goodbye. Mrs. Owens, she's here. She's been here the whole time. I figured maybe she had to go someplace. No, she was here. She was upstairs. Mrs. Owens comes downstairs, great lady. I hadn't met her before because when she'd been in Syracuse to see her son. And I'm sweating. I mean, this is the key recruit for us, like he is for Rolly or North Carolina. His mother walks up and says, Coach, I'm sorry, but, don't worry about this. Michael's up there. Billy's coming up there. Don't worry about it. Goodbye. True story. This was in September. The recruiting process lasted all year. And, of course, North Carolina, Villanova, we were like first 1 week, second 1 week, third 1 week. At the end, his mother called me and said, Coach, I told you, didn't I? I never had a doubt. But we had a special team, and, I talked about Carmelo and what he did, what he brought to our team. But we have a player at Syracuse. His name's Jerry McNamara. And I never go anywhere anymore without talking about Jerry McNamara, because he's what I think college basketball is all about. He's a 6'1", little Irish kid that just loves to play basketball, and he loves to win games. And he doesn't care if he scores points or if he doesn't score points. We played a game his freshman year. We're playing at Notre Dame. They got an All-American point guard, Chris Thomas, a great player. And the game starts out, and I know Jerry's pumped up because Notre Dame was one of his schools, and, Penn State thought they were, but, Notre Dame was one of his schools. And the fans, the students, the entire 45-minute warm-up are just getting on Jerry. The entire 45 minutes, and I'm just as happy as I can be. Because Jerry really kind of just comes out and plays. He knew Carmelo's our best player, and, he knew we had Akeem. So, Jerry would just, but the fans, I knew this was going to be bad for Notre Dame. So Jerry starts out the game, makes 5 threes, first 5 shots he takes. He's got 15, Carmelo gets a layup and somebody else. We're up 19-3. Jerry never takes another shot the entire half. We're still up, we're up 10, 12, 14. But Notre Dame's a good team. They're an NCAA team. They're a Sweet 16 team last year. I think we're the only team that beat them at home. Second half starts, no Jerry. Carmelo scores, but the game's getting close. About 6 or 7 minutes to go in the game, it's a 2-point game. I take a timeout. Jerry's got 15 points. Same 15 he had. I said, Jerry, yeah, Coach, I think we need a couple baskets. Would you mind taking a shot? Yeah, okay, sure. Timeout, goes out, bang, 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 3 threes, game's over. It's a true story. The kid, he knew he had his points. He proved his point. And let Carmelo, go on with this thing. But that's the kind of kid, he doesn't look at how many points he got. He kind of looks at how many we need. It's like when we get to Kansas, we're playing Kansas, and, last year we got a break. We had 2 games in Boston, which everybody thinks is like a home court for us, although it's 300 miles away. But then we played in Albany, which is closer, but it's still a couple hours from Syracuse. But we get through the tournament, through the first 4 games, and we get to Texas, which I thought was a great team. Carmelo put us on his back that game and just got us through the Texas game. We get to Kansas. Kansas had beaten Kentucky. Kansas had beaten Marquette. And Marquette, of course, had beaten Kentucky, the #1 team in the country all year long. And Kansas had beaten Marquette by about 4 touchdowns with the extra points. So we're thinking, we're going out here with these freshmen, we're going to play Kansas, and, this is going to be a tremendous challenge. They've got Collison and Heinrich are seniors and some good young players. In fact, they had enough good young players, they went back to the Final 8 this year. So, we knew we had a difficult game. But when I walked in the locker room, there wasn't one guy that even looked like he was in a national championship game, except for some of the coaches. Some of the coaches were pacing around. But Jerry McNamara was just sitting there just looking at the floor, kind of a little look on his face. And hey, this kid's ready to go. We're just going to, all I said to him, I said, well, we got here playing our game. Let's just go out and play our game. And they went out. Jerry took 6 threes in the first 10 minutes and made all 6. And then he kind of got out of the way and let Carmelo take us the rest of the way home. But, he's a special player, and I just am blessed to be able to coach a kid like him. And the interesting thing this year, when we played in the first round of the tournament, we weren't as good this year. We struggled to get in the tournament. We play against BYU. Hakeem gets in foul trouble. BYU's shooting 70% against our defense. And Jerry ends up, saying, the only way we're going to win is if I shoot a lot. And so he had 28 the first half and kept us in the game. And then he got 15 in the second half. Didn't score for a while because Hakeem had 20 in the second half. But at the end, when we needed him, he made the winning basket again. And he played and won the Maryland game. He could barely play. He's a very asthmatic kid and really had trouble getting up and down the court, but we really couldn't take him out of the game because we didn't have a backup point guard. He played 40 minutes and didn't make a 3 until we really, at the last 2 or 3 minutes when Maryland got back in the game, we had to have a 3. He made a 3 to get us just enough so that we could hold on. But he's that kind of kid. And, we finished the season, we came home, and we knew he'd been hurt, but he goes to the doctor, and doctor calls me in the office and says, well, Coach, I got to tell you, Jerry played the last 2 months with a torn rotator cuff and a separated shoulder, right shoulder. And he played the last 2 months of the season with it. He's got to have an operation, got to get this thing fixed. But it kind of tells you, Jerry said it was sore, he got ice on it, said it bothered him, but he knew that we couldn't play basketball without him. He didn't want to find out how bad it was. And, it's something that's perfectly fixable. He'll be back, in a couple months. But it shows you what college sports is all about. It's those guys. It's the Jerry McNamara's, the Carmelo Anthony's. It's guys like Doug West. It's guys like the other award winners up here. It's not about, what some people try to make college sports. But, yeah, do we have problems? Sure. Every walk of life, every business, every organization has some problems. But when you work with guys like we've been blessed, Rolly and I have been blessed to work with, and you watched his team play against, one of the great teams in basketball history, Georgetown. Now, I don't give Rolly quite as much credit as everybody else because what Rolly doesn't tell you is that year, see, he's a little sneaky guy. That year, what did they beat you by? 3 and 5, right? In overtime during the regular season. People don't remember that. That's how good this guy was. Well, I wasn't going to bring up. Rolly just has to bring up, what did we beat you by? The last two regular season games they played when they won the national championship, at Pittsburgh and at Syracuse. And at Pittsburgh, 25 points, they get beat. Right or wrong? At Syracuse, 30 got beat. When this guy won, it's winning the national, they couldn't even come close in the league. Once they got out of the tough Big East, they were fine. They just had to beat North Carolina and Kentucky and, teams like that. I kid them a lot. It was one of the great games in basketball, college basketball history. And the thing that's remarkable about the game is that Georgetown didn't play bad. Georgetown shot over 50%, and they shot 40% for the year. They couldn't shoot the ball in the ocean. Georgetown was never known for shooting the basketball, in case you weren't watching. They taught how not to make shots at Georgetown so Patrick could get more rebounds. But they shot the hell out of the ball against Villanova. They played a great game. But, all those little Catholic priests down at the end of the Villanova bench are there for a reason, They're not down there like for X's and O's. It was a great achievement. It was a great game. And it was great for our league. We had 3 teams in that Final Four. And 2 teams, Boston College got beat in the Sweet 16, and Syracuse, which we had a decent team, we got beat in the Sweet 16 that year. So that was a pretty good effort from the Big East, and I don't think anybody will ever do that again, and that's college basketball because we have such great parity, such great teams. But I wanted to finish with one Penn State story. I was quoted a number of years ago by I don't know what his name was, but I think he was a talk show host in Altoona, Pennsylvania, as saying, well, Penn State's going to get killed in the Big Ten Conference in basketball. Which I said, but I didn't, as a young coach, you have to, I've learned. You can't say anything even if it's in context with something else, because what I really said, they were talking to me about Syracuse going to the Big Ten. And I said, this is a long story by a local writer. And it was before the internet, so you figure you could tell something to a guy in Syracuse, and it really wouldn't get down to Altoona. But today you know better. But that time, I didn't know. But I said Syracuse couldn't compete. We couldn't compete. We were coming off, we were about 8th in the country that year, which we'd underachieved due to my poor coaching in the tournament. But you believed it. I don't know, you believed it. I thought maybe we'd get somebody that wouldn't believe that, but never mind. Forget that. See, after last year, it don't matter. So anyway, and thanks for the key smart reminder. I like that. I needed that. But what happened is, in the context of the story, I said, we can't compete, and we're pretty darn good. At that time, that year, Penn State was, 70th or 80th in the country in basketball, whatever. Better than they are today, but, they were down there. And so I said, I don't think there's any way Penn State could compete. Well, the only thing that came out of that whole story was me saying that Penn State couldn't compete in the Big Ten, which really wasn't the point of the story. It was really about me thinking we couldn't because of the travel and the fact that Eastern kids, I'm not going to go into Billy Owen's house and say, do you want to come to Syracuse and we're going to play in Iowa? Or we're going to play in Bloomington, Indiana? Or we're going to play in, wherever. When Roley's going to go in and say, well, what are you going to go to the Big Ten when you can play in Philadelphia and New York and Washington? That's what I was trying to get to. And so that whole thing got snowballing. And I just want to set the record straight here that it was not an intended slap at Penn State. It was more of teams not going to conferences that they shouldn't have. Why, when we were rumored to go to the ACC, that's not something I felt was good for our program because of the travel involved. But again, those are all things that we'd like to clear up. And as I said earlier, I have nothing but tremendous respect for Penn State football and Coach Paterno and what he's done over his unbelievable career. I just hope I could last even close to that long in this sport. But again, it's a privilege for me to be here. and to be associated with a dinner of this quality. I've been around the country. I've spoken at sports banquets around the country many, many times, and this is by far the best run and the most distinguished, with the exception of a couple presenters that were up here, tonight, that we will have to apologize for. And I'd be very happy to take any questions that are not from Foge and from Rowley.
Jimmy may have answered this one, but who's the best player you ever coached?
Well, I always answer the Syracuse question, but the best player that ever played at Syracuse was a guy named Dave Bing. That way I can kind of avoid all the answers, because he averaged 29 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 assists, which was a triple-double back then. And he was also my roommate, so, obviously I'm a little prejudiced there. But Carmelo Anthony and Derek Coleman and Billy Owens are the three greatest players that I've ever been involved with. And I told Carmelo at the end of last year, if you stay another year, I think you might be the greatest player, but that didn't work.
In conjunction with that, with kids going to the NBA early, what are the extra challenges in maintaining continuity to program when they may only be there for 1 year, maybe 2?
Well, that's the problem in all college basketball. And there's a very good side to guys leaving early. The good side is it puts Southern Illinois and it puts Tulsa and Gonzaga and schools like that with an opportunity to beat Syracuse. They can beat Duke, because they're going to get guys that are going to be there 4 years. And the power schools that would get 2 or 3 McDonald's All-Americans, are going to not get those guys, or they're going to leave early. You could never beat Duke in today's world if kids went to college for 4 years and stayed 4 years. Duke would either never lose a game, or they would almost never lose a game, because they would have 9 or 10 McDonald's All-Americans there, the best players in the country, and they have, I think, the best coach in the country. So you would never beat Duke. It would be no chance. They're still going to be hard to beat. They're still going to be hard to beat, but they're at least beatable somewhat, as was Connecticut. As good as Connecticut was this year, they lost 4 games in our league. So as good as they were, and eventually proved they were, college basketball is helped overall because there's more parity, more teams can win, more teams can do well in the NCAA tournament. So I think it's actually, I don't like it, but you have to adjust to it. In our recruiting, we don't recruit guys that say they're going to the NBA. We do recruit guys who, might be there a year or 2. We didn't think Carmelo would be a 1-year player. He weighed 185 pounds. He was 6'7". And when we signed him as a junior, by the time he graduated from high school and came to Syracuse, he was 6'9", weighed 230 pounds, and that is good recruiting. That is really good recruiting. But the only better recruiting story than that is David Robinson. He was 6'6" in high school, and when he went to Navy, when he graduated, he was 6'11". That's even better recruiting. But, we have a great game, and we have a game that everybody can compete. The better teams are still going to be there. They're still going to win. But if they slip a little bit, they can drop down. Duke has had a couple tough seasons. North Carolina's had a couple tough seasons. Kentucky didn't win the national championship for 3 or 4 years. So for their fans, that's tough. So that's what's good about it for college basketball. I think it hurts the NBA game. The NBA people don't really like all the young players, because for every Kobe Bryant or Kevin Garnett, there's 10 other guys that just don't make it because they're not ready, but they think they're ready. Those guys, and LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony, those guys are the exceptions. Most kids need to go to college. Doug West went to Villanova. He worked his tail off for 4 years, and he had a 12-year NBA career. A guy like Doug West today might be tempted to go early and might never be good enough to make it. So, I don't like the way it is, but it is the way it is, and you have to adjust to it.
Last question, Jim. Speaking of the young kids, who's the NBA Rookie of the Year? Carmelo or LeBron James?
Phew. I did this at a clinic the other day. I had 400 or 600 kids, and I ask them to vote. So I ask everybody here to vote. Everybody who thinks LeBron James, raise your hand. A lot of hands. Everybody, put them down. Everybody that thinks Carmelo Anthony. Well, it's close. That's what I think it should be. It should be a tie. You know, if they have any sense, and David Stern is a pretty good marketing guy, if he has any sense at all, they'll be co-rookies of the year. They both will be the two great players in the NBA. My prediction will be within 3 years, maybe 4 at the most, they'll be the two best players in the NBA, and there'll be two guys who'll be playing for the championship, because I think both franchises will surround them with great players, and great players will want to play with them because they're unselfish, great team players. So that's what my take is on the whole thing. Again, I've enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me. Great night.